In 1966, Professor Carroll Quigley, who was Bill Clinton's mentor, stated something very strange in his book, The Tragedy and the Hope, and I quote, "The powers of the financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled by a feudalist fashion, by the central banks of the world acting in concert, by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences," end quote. In fact, novelist and early 20th century writer H.G. Wells said it this way: "You may say that the world has been changed by a smaller handful than those who meet here tonight, but they meet under a Pentecostal tongues of fire." Yes, folks, God can give warnings concerning the shape of things to come through the secular world. It can do it through its art and entertainment, the media, literature, and even by what the occult world proudly pontificates. People want a biblical principle for that, and it comes from the book of Job when Elihu is speaking in Job chapter 33. God speaks one way to this person, another way to that person, in dreams and visions of the night. He gives warning in order to keep people from going into the abyss. In fact, H.G. Wells wrote in his classic novel, The Sleeper Awakes, that portrays a dystopic future which is remarkably coming to pass before our very eyes. Very prophetic book, very prophetic book. And this is written way back in the early 1900s, folks. This is over 100 years ago when this book was written, and it gives you a picture of what we are living in today. And let me give you a brief summary of what H.G. Wells' book, The Sleeper, what it's about. Just give you a summary of it. The main protagonist goes by the name of Graham, who is a wealthy man living in London in 1897. You can say that he's of the upper middle class, who takes drugs to cure his intolerable insomnia, but ends up in a coma where he's kept alive in a comatose state. He never ages because of this comatose state. Why do they want him to be kept alive? As long as he remains alive, the trustees can use his wealth as they see fit. 200 years later, in the year 2100, Graham suddenly wakes up. His attending medical staff are completely shocked, folks, because he was never expected to wake up. Graham soon learns that he had inherited huge amounts of wealth and that his money had been put into a trust and later managed by an elite group identified as the White Council. Over the years, the White Council used his wealth to establish a vast political and economic world order. His waking up now makes him CEO of this rightful inheritance, and the trustees don't like it. So H.G. Wells uses symbolism in his novels to express certain truths. For example, the protagonist, the main character, Graham, represents the middle-class, conservative, law-abiding, tax-paying citizen who is put to sleep, living a dreamland life, ignoring what is going on by those in the White Council, who, like the progressives today, use the middle-class tax base to advance what people hate. So let's get back to the book here. I'm just setting the stage for the book because it's very important to understand a summary of it. The people of 2100, the year 2100, learned that the sleeper has awakened and thus can gain back his inheritance. The common folks see Graham as a figurehead of hope to fix the mess they now live in. So they demand to see him. However, the authorities of the White Council thwart this by placing Graham under house arrest, where he learns that he's the legal owner of over half the entire globe, as long as he's alive, okay? Also, Graham learns how the White Council invested his wealth in the acquisition control of all industries along with all political entities of half the globe, and in the process removed all parliamentary, democratic governments, all governments, and thus set up a plutocracy. A plutocracy. What is a plutocracy? A plutocracy is any society that is controlled and ruled over by people of great wealth. In other words, the rich man of the earth, the great men of the earth, as Revelation chapter 18 talks about, who use a capitalist system to acquire power, then seek to destroy it so they can control everything. They view themselves as having the right to rule with godlike powers because they acquire wealth. They hate the free market system because they view it as a threat to their power of influence, because through a free market system, all can share and create wealth. And they despise this, especially the middle class who is using this system to better themselves. Just as Professor Karl Quigley wrote in his 1966 book, A Tragedy in the Hope, the growth of financial capitalism is made possible as centralization of world economic control and the use of power for the direct benefit of financiers and the indirect injury of all other economic groups. That's the plutocratic goal of what they're trying to do, folks. They're trying to take over the world because they deem that themselves as the right to rule. Thus, a plutocracy leans towards supporting totalitarianism, fascism, socialism, and they love monarchies and they love the communist systems of government because they can control these systems in order to corner the market more easily, get rid of the competition, the middle class entrepreneurs, the private businessmen. Why? To control every aspect of life of the common Joe and Sue. After all, power corrupts. You heard that? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But they view themselves as, since they have this ability to make wealth and acquire this power, that gives them the right to rule. So Wells goes back in his book, The Sleeper Awakes, and has this as a backdrop, this philosophy in the background, what I just mentioned. In Wells' book, The Sleeper Awakes, finds a group of rebels led by a man named Ostrog, and they end up rescuing Graham. Ostrog is in reality called a controlled opposition, who then makes Graham into a figurehead to gain support for the rebellion. In reality, Graham is being used to acquire all his wealth by Ostrog. Why? Well, the answer is simply to take over the entire world without Graham's full knowledge, because Graham would resist this if he found out. So he represents, Ostrog represents the Dark Lodge types that Alice Bailey mentions, that are solely used by the hierarchy. Folks, let's look at this. An externalization of the hierarchy on page 40, and Alice Bailey writes this, she channeled this. The two forces are used to increase tension in the world. The forces of materialism streaming out into the three worlds from the so-called dark forces or Black Lodge. From those groups who lie and workers are the antithesis of the Great White Lodge. What she's saying here, if you understand the same concept here is seen in Hegel's dialectic, a thesis and antithesis. So the White Lodge, or the White Council in H.G. Wells' book, is the pillar of mercy and compassion, the thesis, and the Dark Lodge is the antithesis. So, and she goes on, she says, there's a little that I can tell you about the dark forces or the Dark Lodge. They are not the problems of humanity, but of the hierarchy. And she goes on and says, the task of these forces is the preservation of the form of life, of the working out of methods and aims which are inherent in the process of manifestation. The Black Lodge, so-called, is occupied with the form aspect of manifestation. The White Lodge, the good guys, with the consequences of aspect. And it might therefore be stated that, okay? The dark forces, the bad guys, are powerful energies working to preserve that which is ancient and material. Hence, they are preeminently the forces of crystallization, of form, preservation, the attractiveness of matter, the lure of that which is extant in the form of life in three worlds. What is she talking about? Well, folks, I got to tell you, it's talking about a good cop, bad cop thing, exactly what I said before. And in book here, it's talking about that. In essence, Graham represents the middle class who's being played by the White Lodge and Dark Lodge groups of world servers in the same manner. They want to create the hierarchy goes into and controls people as controlled opposition to move the masses to support the Dark Lodge. And so let's look at the next slide here. The Dark Lodge, or the bad guys, okay? and the White Lodge, the good guys, bad guys, okay? They work to prevent the understanding of that which is of the New Age. They endeavor to preserve that which is familiar and old, to counteract the effects of the oncoming culture and civilization, to bring blindness of the peoples, and to feed steadily the existing fires of hate, separateness, and criticism, and cruelty. Cruelty. And so, in other words, the Dark Lodge is set up to put people in place to have bigoted philosophies, ideas that would paint everybody who doesn't want change as them, to justify they are haters, they are bigots, they're fascists, and they need to be exterminated. That by the good guys, the White Lodge. That is the game they're playing. That's the game. You'll see this in The Sleeper Wakes. H.G. Wells portrays that very well. So let's go back to this book here. The forces, as far as intelligent people of the world are concerned, work insidiously and cloak their efforts in fair words, leading even disciples to express hatreds of persons, ideologies, fostering the hidden seeds of hatred found in many human beings. So, what she's saying, the Dark Lodge is the problem of the hierarchy. They infest a group of people who will be this way to paint everybody who's decent, good, who has a live and let live attitude, likes to reason, intelligent, good people, as the enemy. Why? To make the White Lodge justifying to get rid of them at all costs. We're seeing it portrayed today big time. Agree with a certain ideology, they come, they threaten you and beat you up, just like they did this lady who was a swimmer. Like they did another pro-life meeting, trying to, just a small little meeting, no one meaning anybody harm. They're now painted as the enemy. So the White Lodge, they justifies the White Lodge to come in there and beat, destroy. Thesis, antithesis, white pillar, black pillar. This is the devil's game. And H.G. Wells points this out in his book. That's why I want to bring it up as a stepping stone. So in other words, Ostrog, the character Ostrog, is the controlled opposition of the Dark Lodge, is bent on deceiving people to rebel so that the same White Lodge plutocracy can eventually rule the entire world without anybody knowing they are the same and seek to gel as one. Graham gets away from Ostrog to explore the true state of the common man in this perfect world that Ostrog has envisioned and that the plutocracy, the White Lodge plutocracy, has envisioned. Remember, Ostrog represents the controlled opposition. He's the Dark Lodge. The White Lodge or the White Council is the plutocracy. They're both plutocracies. The same plutocracy playing this controlled opposition game. So that they can eventually rule the entire world without anybody knowing that they're the same entities. Okay, Ostrog gets away, tries to get away with this. Okay, but Graham escapes from Ostrog and he begins to go about exploring the true state of the common man and woman in the world. And this is what is amazing, folks. What Graham discovers matches to a T what is planned and what we see taking shape today. And this book was written well over 100 years ago, folks. I'm telling you, this is an amazing thing. Well, Graham discovers that no one lives independently in the countryside or live in small towns anymore. In fact, they've suddenly been moved someplace, moved into big cities. He finds out that the vast majority of the population of Britain, because where this is taking place is Great Britain, have been moved into 4 great cities or collection centers, which are powered by huge, you got it, windmills. Wow. How did he know about windmills, clean energy, and 15-minute cities or 30-minute cities in the United States? How did he know that was the goal? I'll tell you why in a minute. In order to feed all the people, Graham finds that farming and agriculture is run in an industrial production line fashion. In other words, all the farmers are gone. You have some people in there who, just like a factory has a bunch of farms around them, and they collect food. And that's what feeds the people. Have a bug sandwich, So what can I say? In the cities themselves that Graham goes in and visits, he finds that people are living in horrible, terrible, terrifying conditions, where unskilled workers toil mundanely in factories. They are paid in food, not money. You know, you own nothing and you'll be happy about it. Jawohl. That is the world he found. There is no job security there whatsoever. You're there as a possession of the state to basically keep the plutocracy rich and happy. Basically, is what he's finding out. Okay, he also found that the citizenry must wear color-coded clothing that identifies their class and status and position as a worker bee class. Some were lower than others. Okay, and the color coding also represents a surveillance system, because there was a surveillance system there to keep the worker bees in line. Graham also finds that the family unit no longer existed, and the children are cared for in huge institutions such as indoctrination centers. And that the common folks are controlled by something called babble machines, which spread news and so forth constantly to keep people confused. Now, if one is a good worker bee, Graham finds out that they can go to pleasure cities where unspecified pleasures await, if they're good worker bees. Also, he also finds the most frightening thing is that euthanasia, I can never pronounce that word. In other words, legal suicide is now considered normal. And he also finds that disease is absolutely rampant. So like Canada, they have assisted suicide. That's what it is. Assisted suicide is considered normal. And in Canada, it has been normalized too. Think about it. And disease is rampant. Let your mind wonder about why anybody would want disease rampant to keep a population under control. I'm just curious if anybody want to take a guess about that. This is the new world that Graham saw. And the most startling thing that Graham saw was this. This new world was policed by a once disadvantaged racial group turned into a state-run police force in order to keep the worker bees in a line, obedient to the will of the plutocracy. So you find the entire progressive playbook here, right? This is an amazing thing, folks. It is. It just is like looking and seeing in the past that God was trying to send a warning in a secular way. This is the future. This is where we're headed, and we are there. We're in the stepping stones, ready to step into this world, okay? Because the middle class has been lulled to sleep in dreamland, and by many, many ways. And the church, unfortunately, largely has been responsible for that demise. We got to face reality, because they went into dreamland too, with dreamland doctrines, dreamland this, to distract them from being salt and light of the world. Okay, well, let's look at this slide. Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, said this: the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat, the lowest social economic class, to the position of ruling class, to win a battle of democracy. For what purpose? To abolish private property, to wrest by degrees capital from the bourgeoisie, the middle class, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state. That is the world that Graham saw. That is the world in which we are headed, okay? We see the same ideas being portrayed in The Sleeper. We see this in the imposings of 15, 30-minute cities. We're seeing it in the Netherlands with farmers protesting the taking of their land and private property, where only industrial-grade farms are going to happen. We see with the takeover and the acquisition of farmland here all over the globe, especially in the United States. We see this where certain progressive parties in any country, where they want the state will raise your kids, not you. You are domestic terrorists because you have outdated ideas. You are the Dark Lodge. You are against change. You are against diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because if you're not kind and gentle, we'll censor you. We will not accept bullying of any type. Yet they are the bullies. They are neither inclusive and nor are they kind. They are the Dark Lodge. They are the White Lodge. Thesis, antithesis, battling to create a non-existent state of nirvana. These people are on a holy crusade to bring that out. And that's the world that he found. And right now, we are seeing that right now. We're seeing people baffled and confused by babble machines of talking heads and entertainment to distract them in dreamland. We see this concept of forming a metaverse world so you can take a trip to a pleasure city and just escape the insanity of the world. Just plug into the internet. Just live in your little cubicle and just and interact with the world that way. The plutocracy knows what's best for you. We see like Canada leading the way for assisted suicide by all means possible. Just let your mind wander again. We see diseases and threats of diseases and news about diseases running rampant. Recall that a plutocracy seeks to bring governments under their exclusive control, either directly or indirectly, to gain wealth for both. So only the extremely wealthy rule all. In fact, Fabian socialism does the same under the disguise of improving the social welfare for all. They're the good guys. They're the White Lodge, okay? Fabian socialism seeks to control governments of the world by a plutocracy to bring about social change. They reject the violent revolution of Marxism, but seek take over the world in a theosophical manner by means of slow evolution, one brick at a time, to forge a brave new world, teaching everybody right human relationships, and that collectivism, socialism, Marxism, fascism rock. The founding vision of Fabianism, or the original founders of Fabian's society, or the socialist here, was influenced by the theosophical ideology of H.P. Blavatsky's successor, Annie Besant, who became a Fabian herself, who advocated the slow education of the masses to embrace a collectivist form of socialism that was later adopted. Later, Alice Bailey literally and coherently channeled the entire plan. I carry this out last 3 messages of this series. It says here, in the externalization of the hierarchy, Alice Bailey channeled this, and I quote, thus a great and new movement is proceeding and tremendously increased interplay and interactions taking place. This will go on until AD 2025. During the years intervening between now and then, very great changes will be seen taking place. And 2025, the date of in all probability will be set for the first stage of the externalization of the hierarchy. This present cycle from that date until now is she called it the stage of the forerunner, which is preparatory in nature, testing in its methods, and intended to be revelatory in its techniques and results. In other words, initiate brainwash. This is how Fabian socialism got its roots, is through the Theosophical Society, through Annie Besant, who was the successor of H.P. Blavatsky, who implanted this idea that the Fabians can forge a new world one brick at a time by slow evolution through a plutocracy. She set the mindset there, okay? I'm going someplace with this, folks. I really am. Keep tracking with me. I hope you're following me. There's a reason why I'm doing this. Therefore, Fabian socialism shares the same guiding principles as the Theosophical Society to bring about a new world of group servers to achieve right human relations governed by an overshadowed, possessed plutocracy by the externalized hierarchy beginning around the year 2025, just 2 short years away. And you'll see preparatory things and people going crazy, have you not? And they call you names if you disagree with their inclusive. We believe in inclusivism. We don't believe in bullying. But if you disagree with our inclusiveness, we're going to bully you into submission. Thus, they disproved they're not inclusive, nor are they kind, because they want to silence you. The reason why they want to silence you because you've been classed as the dark pillar people, the bad guys. You're being played just like Graham was, okay? In fact, guess what? I bet you didn't realize this. H.G. Wells was a Fabian socialist. He sought to reform it, but he grew disgusted with its governing structure because it was just too slow and disorganized in his likes. So he resigned from it. However, Wells has remained a die-hard socialist till the day he died. His intent was to revamp Fabian socialism into a more radical form of socialism, which we have seen morphed today, called progressivism. H.G. Wells argued that the old Fabian plutocratic system was too disorganized to achieve any form of lasting socialism. He contended that it needed to become a religious-like movement, similar as Alice Bailey channeled the need for a one-world religion of socialism. And his idea of socialism was the world's religion, okay? And you have a religious system that supported the socialist thing. He wanted he wanted to radicalize Fabianism. In fact, H.G. Wells said in his essay entitled Faults of the Fabian, page 18, that one must make socialist and you will achieve socialism. There is no other way. Alice Bailey said the same thing. Basically, you have to initiate the entire world to embrace the new ideas of a new world order, okay? And just let your mind wander on that, folks. There's no other way to achieve unless one makes a social movement that moves the hearts of the middle class to embrace an all-loving plutocracy-type system of socialism with your best interest in mind. You will own the nothing and you will be happy about it. Jawohl! They justify doing this to you for your own peace and safety. That you need to be taught right human relationships because you're a hater, you're a bigot. We're going to make you more inclusive and bully you until you comply. But we're against bullying, though, and we are against hate, but our hate is justified to bully you. Let me tell you what socialism is. Socialism is both an economic and political system. The government is in charge of everything. Okay, so socialism is when the government is in charge of everything that creates goods and services like factories, schools, farms, so forth, etc. They control everything. So let's look at what a plutocracy kind of looks like right here. Okay, let's look at it. I want to bring this up. Okay, socialism seeks to destroy private land ownership and replace it with a centralized state ownership purchased behind the scenes by the ruling plutocracy as the best means of production to profit from and control governments with. Okay? In fact, the plutocratic system was the governing system used by the Roman Empire, ancient Grecian city-states, and pre-World War II Japan, as seen in monarchies, emperors, and pharaohs, used in ancient Mesopotamia with its empires and kings who worked hand-in-hand with the great merchants and the elites of their time to rule and thus mutually profiteer off of each other. And how do they do so? They want to acquire property. How? By, as Maynard Keynes said, the Keynesian economics, by continuous process of inflation, governments can confiscate and secretly unreserve an important part of wealth of their citizens. Inflation is good news to the plutocracy, right? You seen anything like that by chance? I have to, just understand I have to kind of guard my words here. In fact, so the plutocracy, these rich elites, okay, got to think for a moment. In Daniel chapter 2, that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a statue. And it had two iron legs that represent the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was a plutocracy. That's what people are missing about this. A lot of prophecy scholars miss this. It was a plutocracy. The message is clear. When you see this plutocracy beginning to walk to achieve its desire to control all vestiges of your life, but living by ruling all with iron, leading to the rise of a new head of a new world state, of a perfect world order, Jesus comes and soon and smashes that Hummer to pieces. That's the message of the statue. Nebuchadnezzar's golden head was a plutocratic system. The Medes and Persians was ruled by a plutocracy. Greece was based on a plutocracy. And Rome was a plutocracy. That's the controlling link that connects all elements together. The golden-headed dream of making a golden new world ruled by one person on who the plutocracy controls. Make through a one-world religion that makes buku bucks and profiteers and helps pay off government officials to do the plutocracy's will. This is why the book of Revelation, chapter 18, talks about the great men of the earth weeping and mourning at the loss of the Babylonian system. And he identifies them as the great men of the earth, the great merchants of the earth, the plutocracy. See how this begins to connect? H.G. Wells' model for a new Fabian socialism was first to win over the middle class opposition by making them socialists, with the aid of the plutocracy working behind the scenes to educate all to embrace socialism, leading to a utopic world. Alice Bailey terms the possessed, overshadowed plutocracy, who's in bed with the occult world here. They get possessed or overshadowed by the externalization of the hierarchy of these fallen watchers to begin to infiltrate all cultural centers of influence, who initiate and manipulate the masses into the ways of esoteric ideas to bring about a new order to the world that comes through totalitarian, socialist democracies and communist forms of government. Despite their flaws, they are seen as the best means to achieve this. The idea of group control to govern right human relationships that, wear your colored outfits, live in your highly surveilled 15-minute cities. You're in a perfect world where you own the nothing and you'll be happy about it because the plutocracy is looking out for you. Yavo, let's go to Davos and meet and plan how to take over the world. So that is what we're seeing. During former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover's testimony before the House Committee on Appropriations regarding the communist conspiracy, he stated, "They have infiltrated every conceivable sphere of activity: youth groups, radio, TV, motion picture industries, church, school, educational and cultural groups, the press, nationality, minority groups, and civil and political units." Ariza Benson Taft on the Improvement Era on page 26, January 1967, stated, "From the 5th grade to the 4th year of college, our young people are being indoctrinated with Marxist philosophy, and I'm fearful of the harvest." This has been in the woodworks for some time, just like Alice Bailey said, in the externalization of the hierarchy. They want to come and externalize themselves around the year 2025 with a build-up and preparatory stages and testing stages to bring this about. In H.G. Wells' world, you have to make socialists first. You have to make the world socialist-minded. Think socialist. Think esoteric, as the Theosophical Society would say, to improve the betterment of the world. This mirrors Alice Bailey's writings to a T, but in her words, it's to make all good world citizens who are taught right human relationships and the need for group control and collectivism, just like H.G. Wells wanted, was to be governed by a plutocracy to ensure compliance. H.G. Wells reveals what is needed to bring about this is by creating a world brain. This guy must have been on the inside loop on this stuff, because he wrote a book and they compiled a bunch of essays of him lecturing, and they compiled it in a book called The World Brain. And as this, you go on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia describes the world brain. I don't have time to go through it all as this. And Wikipedia does an adequate job of summarizing the book, The World Brain. I'm just going to quote a couple of paragraphs, and I quote, "The World Brain is a collection of essays and addresses by the English science fiction pioneer, social reformer, evolutionary biologist, and historian H.G. Wells, dating from the period 1936 to 1938. Throughout the book, Wells describes his vision of the world brain, a new, free, synthetic, authoritative, permanent world encyclopedia that could help world citizens make the best use of universal information and resources to make the best contribution to world peace. Throughout the book, Wells describes his vision of the world brain, a new, free, synthetic, authoritative, permanent world encyclopedia that could help world citizens, remember, I'm quoting this again, world citizens, to make world citizens. In fact, Alice Bailey talks about making world citizens. I keep coming back to the connection. I found a link that the Theosophical Society influenced the Fabian societies. He wanted to radicalize it, make radical progressive mix of totalitarian, social democratic, and communist means, mix them together in order to create this new world that's governed by a plutocracy. You need an iron oligarchy, iron oligarchy, as Jack London says, to govern the world. And in order to maintain and silence the opposition, because the plutocracy wants to control all means of production, so they prosper. There's no competition, no middle class, no entrepreneurs, no free men, no free women at all. No ideas allowed, no innovation allowed. They control it all. So H.G. Wells goes on in this book, and basically his premise is of having all human knowledge that's housed in this so-called world encyclopedia called the world brain, that's accessed easily by masses as a tool to educate, indoctrinate, initiate, train all people to become good world citizens. In other words, one must first make socialist. That's the idea of the world brain, was one must first make socialists. That's what Wells said. When Wells wrote these essays in 1936-38, there was no system to be able to do this. Then World War II happened, and the advent of simple computers came into the scene. From there, the idea of a world brain continued to form, leading to the advent of the World Wide Web, the Internet, now supercomputers, algorithms, and advanced AI systems, and even delves into transhumanist movement, where you are now hooked up to the AI Internet of all things, hooked up to this world brain, a beast system. So I got to tell you what, after I examine H.G. Wells' books and works here, I'm convinced that he was influenced by the esoteric ideas of Bailey and borrowed heavily from them. If not, if he wasn't aware of it, then this serves as an example of how an overshadowed person is used to disseminate the hierarchy's plans. Why do I say this? In 1928, at age 62, H.G. Wells wrote the book entitled The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for World Revolution. This is from the 1928 edition. I'm going to give you a summary of it. Of the 1928 edition on page 198, he contends that there needs to be a scheme to establish human control over the destinies of life by liberating life from its present dangers, uncertainties, and miseries. Again, this mirrors the concept that was channeled to Alice Bailey. The same justifications. We're going to liberate people from their confines of this dark lodge, which is the hierarchy controls, and we're going to make a new system. Thesis, antithesis type thing. This is achieved, he goes on, by scientific testing and applying proven results in order to create a common vision in the human consciousness of the need to unify social, political, and economic systems together. The three worlds that Alice Bailey talks about, and to make him a more spiritual human being in tune with the hierarchy for world peace governed by an all-loving plutocracy, only looking out for your best means, your good, so they can exploit you financially. You own nothing and be happy about it. We'll pay you with food, bug burgers for you, steak for us. That's the mentality. That's the mentality, folks. What can I say? Look what Alice Bailey said in Education for the New Age, page 48 and 51. Speaking on the purpose of education in the New Age, Bailey stated to lead him out, the true meaning of the word education, from any limiting condition and train him to think in terms of constructive world citizenship, i.e. global citizen. Page 51. World citizenship is an expression of both goodwill and understanding, should be the goal of an enlightened everywhere and the hallmark of the spiritual man. And in these three, you have right relations established between education, religion, and politics. World citizenship. It's changed now to the phrase global citizen. You ever heard that yet? If you haven't, you got to climb out of your cave. I don't know what else to say. This is all similar to the purposes of diversity, equity, and inclusion training. Remember, Diversity, DEI training. Some of you are going to classes in your organizations to teach you diversity, equity, and training. We will not tolerate bullying here, but if you disagree with us, we're going to bully you. Just disproving they're not inclusive because they don't want to include your point of view at all. They want to extinguish it and liberate you from it because you're closed-minded. You're evil. You're a hater. I wish that you would take down the notes on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They want to be inclusive, including everybody, but you who disagree with them. If we're truly inclusive and really believe in diversity, they would include you and your ideas and reason with you. They want to silence you, which disproves this is not about equity, it's not about inclusion, nor is it about diversity. It is about absolute social control to make you a good socialist. Jalvo, member of the Commisol. Next, H.G. Wells in The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a World Revolution in 1928 edition explains how on page 24, 28 and 44. And I quote, this would be achieved by the well-educated and the influential as their justification to cause a world revolution for universal peace, common welfare, so all can enjoy happy activities established by a new world commonwealth. To get there, Wells contended, and I quote from page 65, drawing together a proportion of all or nearly all the functional classes of contemporary communities in order to weave the beginnings of a world community out of their selection. You hear the same jargon spoken in the WEF and the fascist, Fabian, Marxist, new left, militant, radicalized left, don't you? We gotta change everything. He then goes on page 163 and that this is achieved by making the cause into a world religion. To stir the emotions of humanity as any religion would, to motivate the common person into the noble activity of world service. Again, this mirrors Alice Bailey. On page 24, H.G. Wells defines religion in esoteric terms, the New Age terms of involving subordination of the self to bring self into the alignment to make a better order human affairs or control you to right human relationships. In other words, you got to get people on a religious crusade to look for the new witches in society. Yes, you heard me right. The new witches of society. Women who don't want men in their bathrooms are now going to be burned and beaten to a pulp in the name of love, inclusion, diversity, and tolerance. If you disagree with this new religious fervor, they have an army of people who are ready to beat you into submission because their idea is great, because they're destroying the dark lodge of evil and hate and bigotry that they created in order to mask all people who believe in fairness and who believe in live and let live as the enemy. It can't be reasoned with, so you have a right to, in the name of equity and inclusion and diversity, to censor them, to silence you, to beat you into submission to this dystopian world that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy about it. Have a bug sandwich. Oh, yes, we have plenty of diseases for you. Javo. I'm a person who, when I was a kid, I read H.G. Wells. I read his Time Machine and War of the Worlds. Really liked those books. But I never realized his political leanings in this stuff. And it probably is a shock to you as well. And H.G. Wells was openly hostile to the vestiges of the ancient order, based on a false loyalties, false standards of honor, false religious association. He believed that there should never be any compromise with them. Like Alice Bailey mentioned in her work, this is achieved by Hegel's dialectic, to make the opposition compromise. The socialists don't compromise, but everyone else must compromise, or else harsher measures are needed for the good of humanity, of course, to make a brave, new, inclusive world. H.G. Wells goes on to explain how this is done by constant babble, used to distract so no one sees what's coming, as well as by the use of propagandas as a means to educate all to embrace their new social culture. That's what he explained. I want you to think hard about that. We have constant babble, talking heads. We have controlled opposition in the Republican Party. There's some good Republicans, but you got controlled opposition there who just agree with the Democrats on everything. You have a conspiracy, a real conspiracy, so vast, so big, and I trace it right back to the Fabian socialist model, who became the new progressive left through a new plutocracy that has taken shape and been on the woodworks. In 1971, it came on the scene, and by 1979, it became the WEF under the head of this bald-headed bimbo from Davos. So H.G. Wells goes on how this is done by the constant babble machines, so people will embrace a new culture, and if you're not, you're beaten to a pulp. You have to compromise. They don't. And he explains, in order to bring this out in this book, 1928 book I'm talking about, he explains the following stages. All governments must affirm the womb to the tomb ideology in its people, selling it as a means to stop conflicts between competing governance systems. How? By forming a world government that will protect the people from womb to tomb, along with a loving plutocracy to ensure success. How they do this? One brick at a time. The Fabian socialist model is one brick at a time. Their logo is of a sheep of wolf's clothing. So you get an idea. It's through deception. Number 2 is to replace all private home ownership, land ownership, business ownership, and national sovereignty ownership. Replace all credit monetary systems. Replace all means of production, transportation. In other words, control the blockchain idea here by creating a responsible world executive committee, which is the WEC or WEF here, a plutocratic controlled world government. So the plutocracy takes over everything because they know how to do it best. President Lyndon Baines Johnson, White House address, January 15th, 1964, is a matter of public record. You can check this out. He quotes, and I say, this is what he said, "We're going to try to take all the money that we think is unnecessarily being spent and take it from the haves and to give it to the have-nots that need it so much." This supports Wells' idea, okay, it does, of creating a plutocracy to control everything, the means of production, education. Why? Is for the third principle. This is the third most important part of Wells's ideology here of this new Fabian socialism of a plutocracy is this: to bring forth acceptance to reduce the world's population through reduction, sold as a means of disease control. So one doesn't need so many people to feed because the plutocracy is going to feed everybody. It's all production model. We have so many people, and we can feed this many people if we have this amount of control, but we can't feed everybody, so we have to reduce the world's population. Yavo! They own nothing, they'll be happy about it. We'll pay them in food and give them trips to the metaverse world so they can be happy. As long as they feed us, we just need enough to feed us. Yavo! Reminds me of of the world that is seen in H.G. Wells' their time machine of a plutocracy underground feeding off the goodness of humanity. I won't get into any more on that, but this leads to the fourth thing that he wanted. There are 4 things here. To set a new bare minimum standard for individual freedom and welfare. Why? Why would Wells want that? Why do these people want that? Well, it's to subordinate all people to the goals of the new enlightened elitist plutocracy. This subordination comes through the advancement of the Babel machine, needed to improve human function to the will of the elite, submitting to their exercising of power. Why doesn't the church world speak against this? A long time ago, they did. They warned about this stuff. They addressed social concerns and issues of their day from the pulpit. They were the purveyors of being salt and light in the world. With the advent of Lyndon Baines Johnson and the advent of the 5013C, that slowly petered out. Because if you spoke too much on political matters, you can lose your tax-exempt status by the will of the government. H.G. Wells goes on page 193 of his book there, and I quote, "The vision of a world at peace and liberated for an unending growth of knowledge and power is worthy of every danger along the way. Remember, H.G. Wells was a radical socialist. He was not a kind, gentle guy writing science fiction novels. He had an agenda. In my opinion, H.G. Wells was mirroring himself in a character in the book, The Sleeper Awakes. And that character is Ostrog. Because Ostrog in The Sleeper is a wolf in sheep's clothing, controlled opposition, in order to bring about a new Fabian socialist model, because the logo of Fabian socialism is a wolf in sheep's clothing. In the book, The Sleeper Awakes, Graham is last seen leading a rebellion against Ostrog's world order because he didn't like it, and he perishes in the process. Thus, Ostrog's Wells socialism eventually takes over the world at an appointed hour, and those 15, 30-minute cities become a reality. You won't have farms anymore. You have production centers and factories that make you bug sandwiches. You'll see sterilization, all kinds of things happening to control the world's population because of the plutocracy and all's the best. Jawohl. That's what you'll see. That appointed hour, if it's true, is just as Alice Bailey Channel begins around the year 2025, as the hierarchy begins to externalize inside of a plutocracy of elites in the political class as well, who use ancient esoteric idea of the three-pillar system which Hegel codified in the modern mind through thesis, antithesis, to bring compromise down. You bring the order of society, God's order, his form, and his design on life on earth, you bring it down by successive compromise. I'm going to go back and look at these. You have the pillar of mercy, the white council, the dark council of severity, the left side, keeps alive ignorance and itinerary. There's no change. They want to keep the old order alive. They're the bad guys, unwilling to change. You have the pillar of mercy, the white one, the good guys side is passion, activity, mindfulness, selfless activity. The central pillar is the crown, the eye. It's it's a fusion state. It is dissolving, melting away. It's actually a PRA, paralaic, and it means termination. It means termination, bringing into a non-existent state, thus erasing God's design by blending masculine and feminine together to create a synthesis of unity, harmony, and balance of nirvana. Like I said last week, this template was outdated. It was simplified by Friedrich Hegel, who was trained in this stuff. He lived in this stuff. And he had pillar of mercy is the thesis, pillar of severity, antithesis. And you bring down the existing order by bringing synthesis. In order to make a brave new world, you cause the dark side, which are, to be demonized. So they have to compromise in order to blend everything together through synthesis. The plutocracy plays both sides here. They set up one side, like Ostrog did, to paint everybody in a bad light. Less Second Amendment away because of what they did, what they allowed by reduction and laws in order, criminals in the street until you comply. You have to compromise. We don't. We'll have all the guns. You don't have any. Interesting type of philosophy. This how this Hegel system works. And Hegel's system basically helped communism get started. Okay, and totalitarianism have something to play with and how to take over countries and governments of the world through a plutocracy, working behind the scenes to ensure this comes about. Well, the plutocracy plays both sides, so that the common Joe or Sue out there is preoccupied in a dreamland of distractions, never really realizing that nirvana does not mean bliss, but rather non-existence. Non-existence. Satan worshippers say they don't believe in an entity called the devil or entity. They believe in wisdom or enlightenment or knowledge that just kind of floats around in never land. You have to have an intelligent being for wisdom and knowledge to be. So they are through deception, lying to you because they are serving the devil to bring about the destruction of all that's decent and good into a nirvana state, promising bliss, but it's only non-existence. It's your eraser. In fact, Revelation chapter 18, verse 23 says this: the light of the lamp shall not shine in you any more. The voice of the bridegroom and will not be heard anymore, for your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. So in the time of the end, the plutocracy is going to deceive the entire world. Just like Fabian socialism, it's just one small part of the cog in this development. In fact, Ezekiel chapter 27, verses 24 through 34, speaks of the same event of merchants who rich kings shall weep and be no more. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Isaiah 45, verses 5, I think it's 5, I wrote this down, 5 through 15, speaks of the same thing. It says, sit in silence and go into darkness, you daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no longer be called the lady of the kingdoms. Revelation chapter 17, verses 4 and 5 identifies the daughter of the Chaldeans as the great harlot, this harlot system of the plutocracy of the golden-headed dream to rule through Nebuchadnezzar, to rule the world. That's the dream. Verse 47, but these two things shall come upon you in a moment. In one day, the loss of children and widowhood shall come upon you in their fullness because of the multitude of your sorceries, for the great abundance of your enchantments. For you have trusted in your wickedness and have said, no one will seize me. Your wisdom and all your knowledge have warped you. And you have said in your heart, I am. Therefore, there is no one else besides me. In other words, you said, you are God. And there is no one else besides me to govern the world. Therefore, evil shall come upon you, and you shall not know from where it arises, and trouble shall fall upon you, says the Lord, and you will not be able to put it off, and desolation shall come upon you suddenly, which you shall not know. Your merchants, your great men of the earth, from your youth, they shall wander each one into his quarter. No one will save you. That matches the book of Revelation. Alice Bailey talks about cosmic fire. So this makes a lot of sense. And fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. It shall not be cold to be warmed, nor fire to sit before. And this is talking about the occult flame. Going to cut it off. God had enough. Reached a point of no return here. A time without remedy. You're going to get it. This is where we're heading. A time reached when there is no more remedy that Jesus warned about. He warned about a time of no remedy. When you see the one who brings desolation into the temple, there's going to be a time there's no remedy, called the book of Revelation speaks about the great tribulation. I don't think it can be stopped, but we can be delayed. It can. So people ask me, brother, I don't want to see our country and stuff burn down. No, I'm not saying we should allow it. Can it be delayed? Yes and no. Yes, if the church turns away from its own deceptive dreamland and begins to repent. But if not, the point of no remedy is reached. And that is brought out in Revelation chapter 2 and 3 to the five who living in dreamland, of calling Satan's throne as God's throne, okay? The ones who left their first love, okay? The ones who have Jezebel, the plutocracy, teaching the church how to take over everything, okay? That's the Thyatira, and you have the Sardis type who are dead to Christ now. Very ecumenical in their ideas. And the other Laodicean model, they don't need a Bible anymore. They're what you need enough, nothing. So Jesus is outside knocking on the door, can't come in, and they're just laughing, having a good old time in there. Only the Lord knows when we reach that point. The point is when the majority of those people do not repent. Judgment always begins first in the house of God. And the good news of all this, there is good news, the Lord God will save a true remnant who spread the gospel, demonstrated by how we live by forgiveness, live it by how God instructs us and teaches us what good is, on how to do justly according to truth, balanced by cherishing mercy and by walking humbly before God to implement it and repenting when we need to. It comes by learning to share the gospel message of Jesus Christ as the Holy Spirit to draw others to be born again into a new life is something we got to do. We do this by sharing our personal testimonies of how He changed us and saved us, got us through tough times, whatever. The second way is simply reason with them by explaining what Jesus did on the cross so that they can become saved. However the Lord leads, because this is a God thing, but omnipersonal thing between you and the Lord, how this is done. I can't give you a formula. No one can. This is a work of God, so no one can glory in it except the Lord. Okay? And it all comes by learning to treasure our Heavenly Father more than the things He gives or His promises. And also treasuring Him more than our own lives and our own distractions. We have to live that way. We have to live with integrity. And if we screw up, we admit to it. We make it right. When we teach something wrong, we owe up to it and move on. God will take care of the rest. Also, a remnant will be praying, as Jesus said to pray, to be counted worthy to escape all these things and stand before Him. So I will ask you to make that part of your prayer life. And also pray for the courage to overcome these things. Pray that you know what to do, how to do it, and trust Him. Also look up for your redemption draweth nigh. This means look around, identify what's going around us, what's going around, compare these events with what you see in the Bible about the great men of the earth. Don't be afraid to do what not Elihu said, and I think it's in Job chapter 33 or 32, that God will reveal He'll reveal one thing to another way to another, in dreams, visions in the night, to warn a man to keep his soul back from going into the pit. So you can use things like I bring out. You can use progressive socialists like H.G. Wells. You can use other examples to make your point. You can identify people who the great men of the earth are, and then suddenly everything starts making a lot of sense. And lastly, you need to know what Psalms 2 verses 1 through 4 says. Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, against His anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. And you know what that means? Let us break their form. Let's break God's order and design up. And get rid of God's order and design. That's what they're saying. He who sits in the heavens will laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then He shall speak to them in His wrath and distress them in His deep displeasure. You got to remember the most important thing. If the church don't get it together, we are the remnant. He's coming for us. And you also got to remember, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. It doesn't belong to us. In other words, we live our life as a testimony against them. Right now, in this life, our lives are to be testifying against them, how they treat us. And later in the hereafter, during their final day in court, as Daniel chapter 7 says, there'll be a courts established and all these people are going to be judged. And goes in Revelation chapter 20 about the great white throne. Did you realize that we're going to judge angels? We're going to judge other people who come against us by how they treated us. We'll have our day in court. We're going to be testifying against them. You said that I was a hater, a bigot, and so forth, etc. Now you see my heart, what Jesus Christ did in my life. Now, and you were against that. Bye. Adios. Enjoy your life swimming in the lake of fire. I tried to warn you, I tried to love on you, I tried to pull you out from the flames, and you rejected every one of my overtures. I can't help it. Bye. Have a nice time swimming laps in the lake of fire. Bye, Klaus. We try to warn you. We try to redeem you. We try to say that you're not living, you're not inclusive, nor are you kind when you want to destroy other people who disagree with you. That makes you the bully, not us. Bye. Hope you enjoy swimming in lakes of fire. There's no lakes of fire because we are our own gods. Well, bye. How's that going to work out for you in the afterlife? Not too good, I don't think. But lastly, understand what Hosea chapter 4, verse 6 says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So now you have the knowledge. And I'm going to ask a question. What will you do with this knowledge? With that, folks, I'm going to conclude this. You guys be blessed in Jesus' name.